The morning mist still clung to the trees when Aiden Brody shuffled out onto his porch, cradling a chipped mug of black coffee. The Adirondack wood stretched endlessly around him, hushed and unmoving, like a painting yet to dry. It was early, the kind of quiet hour when even the birds hesitated to break the stillness. Aiden, wrapped in a worn flannel shirt, scratched his graying beard and stared off into the fog, letting the solitude seep into his bones. He had chosen this life. After all, a former journalist once buried in noise, deadlines, and grief, he now lived alone in a hand-built cabin, trading headline for silence and exile. He moved through his morning ritual in half-sleep, feeding the stove, jotting notes into a leather-bound journal, stirring oatmeal with the absent-minded rhythm of someone who had no reason to rush. It had been months since he'd last seen another person in the flesh, and longer still since he'd wanted to. The cabin, surrounded by trees and time, was supposed to be his cure. But as he stepped outside again to toss dishwater, the forest changed. It wasn't a sound or movement that alerted him, just a feeling, like the earth itself had paused. Then he saw her. At the edge of the clearing stood a bear, massive, battered, her dark fur clinging to a frame too thin for spring. Her eyes, fixed on him, held no threat. But what rooted Aiden in place wasn't her size or silence. It was what hung limply from her jaws, a cub motionless, its legs dragging across the dirt like a broken doll. Aiden blinked, disbelieving. The forest, once safe in his indifference, had just placed grief on his doorstep. She didn't move. Neither did he. For several long seconds, the air between Aiden and the bear seemed suspended in glass. Fragile, trembling, waiting to shatter. The mother stood just beyond the porch, her massive body quivering with exhaustion. Her left flank bore a deep gash, crusted with dirt and blood, and her breast came in ragged bursts. Yet it wasn't the wound that held Aiden's gaze. It was her eyes. They were dark, glistening, and filled with something he hadn't expected. Sorrow. Not rage, not hunger. Grief. She lowered her head gently, almost reverently, and placed the cub on the earth in front of her. Its tiny body didn't stir. Limp, lifeless, too small to be gone already. She nudged it once with her nose, then sat back on her haunches, panting heavily. Her shoulders rose and fell in slow, shuddering waves, and from her throat came a sound so soft it barely existed, a low, muffled moan, the kind that doesn't belong to beasts or humans, but to pain itself. Aiden's hand hovered near the cabin door, and for a moment, instinct roared. The rifle was just inside, loaded, resting on the hooks above the mantel. He should grab it. That's what any sane man would do. But he didn't move. Not because he wasn't afraid. He was. But because something in her stillness, her visible heartbreak, cracked through the armor he'd built around his own. He knew that look. He'd worn it himself once, sitting in a hospital hallway long ago, waiting for news that never came. Instead of reaching for the gun, he stepped down from the porch, slow, deliberate, heart-hammering. The boards creaked beneath his weight. The bear flicked an ear but didn't rise. Aiden crouched a few feet away, hands open, speaking gently though he didn't know what he was saying. Words, just words, soft sound to let her know he meant no harm. For reasons he'd never understand. She didn't run. She didn't charge. She just stared at him, hollow and grieving, like a mother who had come not for help, but for witness. And Aiden, the man who had run from the world, found himself kneeling beside a wild heart broken wide open. The mother bear didn't move for a long time after Aiden knelt near her. She just sat there, breathing in quiet, painful intervals, her eyes fixed on the small bundle at her feet. Then, with a slow, hesitant motion, she picked up the cub again, so gently it was almost ceremonial, and took a few unsteady steps toward the porch. Aiden held his breath as she climbed the first stair, the wood creaking beneath her massive paws. But she didn't come any farther. She stopped at the edge, placed the cub softly on the porch as if offering it up, and then backed down again. She didn't look at Aiden. She just waited, her massive body slumped with exhaustion, her head lowered but her ears alert. It was as if she were pleading without sound, placing all her hope in the space between them. Aiden inched forward, barely daring to breathe. His hands trembled as he reached for the small, motionless body. He expected cold, but the cub was still warm. Damp fur, labored breath. Faint but real. A heartbeat, fluttering like a trapped bird. Alive. Against all odds alive. "You stubborn little thing," Aiden whispered, brushing dirt from the cub's tiny muzzle. He turned slightly toward the bear, speaking not as a man to a beast, but as one soul to another. "He's still with us. I'll try to help him." The bear didn't respond. No growl, no step forward, no retreat. Just a quiet stillness, deeper than silence. Her breathing slowed, not from calm, but from something like acceptance. She made no move to interfere. She had handed over the last of her world, and was now watching what became of it. Aiden cradled the cub in his arms. Its body so fragile, he was afraid to move too quickly. But time was already short. The cub needed warmth, fluids, something, anything. He rose and stepped backward into the cabin, glancing once more at the bear. She stood like a sentinel at the edge of the porch, not blocking the way, not demanding anything, just watching, waiting, trusting. And in that unspoken exchange, Aiden understood her completely. This wasn't just an animal's desperation. It was a mother's final prayer. Inside the cabin, chaos clashed with silence. Aiden moved with trembling urgency, swaddling the limp cub in a wool towel he had warmed by the fire. The tiny body barely responded. No protest, no sound, just the faintest flicker of breath against his palm. He set the bundle on a heating pad, praying it would mimic the warmth of the mother now pacing just beyond the window. He rummaged through old supplies, knocking over jars, yanking open drawers. Somewhere in the mess, he found a plastic dropper and stirred warm water with a spoonful of honey, hoping the sugar would jumpstart the little one's blood. The dropper trembled in his hand as he coaxed a few sticky drops into the cub's slack mouth. "Come on," he whispered. "Stay here. Stay." With one hand cradling the cub, he fumbled for his phone and dialed. Rachel answered on the third ring, his biologist friend from back in his reporting days. "It's Aiden." "I've got a cub. He's alive, barely. The mother, she's here too. Won't leave." There was a pause. Then laughter, skeptical. "A cub? Aiden, are you drunk?" "I'm not joking. He's hurt. The mom's injured too. I don't know what I'm doing." The tone on the other end changed instantly. "Okay, listen. Keep him warm. Sugar water is good. Just a little at a time. Do not feed him milk. No sudden movements near the mother. I'll try to get help, but it's going to take hours, if not more." The line went dead, and Aiden was alone again, except he wasn't. He looked out the window. The mother bear hadn't moved. Her hulking shadow sat just beyond the porch, her eyes locked on the door, like a sentry frozen in time. Not roaring, not pacing, just waiting. The weight of her watchfulness was unbearable. Every time the cub twitched or went still, Aiden looked to the bear, as if her patience might break. He was no vet, no ranger, just a man in a flannel shirt with shaking hands, and a wild animal's last hope curled in his lap. The cabin felt smaller by the minute, like the forest itself had folded around it. Every breath, every drop of honey water, every beat of the cub's fragile heart carried the same message: don't let him die. Inside the cramped warmth of the cabin, Aiden worked with a desperation that was foreign to his usual, slow-moving solitude. The little cub lay on the table, barely breathing, its fur matted with dried blood and pine needles. Aiden's hands, once trained to type words and edit truths, now trembled as they wrapped the frail body in towels warmed by the stove. He dug through drawers for anything that might help: an old heating pad, a chipped spoon, honey crust at the bottom of a jar. He warmed water on the stove, added a touch of honey, and gently tried to coax the liquid into the cub's mouth. Nothing. He tilted its head slightly, massaged its throat, whispered something soft and meaningless. Still nothing. Outside the window, the mother bear stood motionless, her enormous frame silhouetted against the snowy forest, eyes fixed on the door. She didn't growl, didn't pace, just watched, unblinking. It was unbearable. Aiden grabbed his satellite phone, the signal weak as always. He called Rachel, a wildlife vet he knew distantly from a past life when he still wrote pieces on conservation. She didn't pick up at first. When she finally did, her tone was clipped, skeptical, brushing off his frantic explanation, until he mentioned the mother bear hadn't left, that the cub was still alive, barely. Then her voice changed. "Keep it warm. Try to get fluids in." "I'm coming," she said, and the line went dead. Aiden looked back at the cub, then at the bear. He felt the crushing weight of his own helplessness. He didn't know what he was doing. He had no training, no experience. Only the unbearable ache of wanting to save something small and innocent from death. He kept trying, because she was still out there, watching. Because the cabin had never felt this full of life, or this close to loss. Aiden barely noticed the cold seeping to the cabin walls as he sat hunched over the table, eyes locked on the fragile body before him. Then it happened. Just a twitch, a tiny spasm in the cub's paw. At first, he thought he imagined it, but then the cub shifted slightly, its nose quivering. Aiden leaned in, holding his breath. Gently, he tried again with the honey water, and this time the cub swallowed. Just once, but it was enough. Hope surged in Aiden's chest like a sudden gust of wind, cracking open a sealed window. He didn't speak, didn't move beyond what was necessary, afraid to break the fragile moment. The cub was breathing, slow and shallow, but steady. It wasn't over. The hours that followed were tense and intimate. Aiden cleaned the cub's wounds with the gentlest touch he could manage, wincing at each raw edge and swelling. One leg looked bad, maybe broken. He made a splint from firewood and fabric. The cub whimpered once, but didn't fight. Fever threatened, and Aiden wrapped it tighter, reheated towels, adjusted the heating pad constantly. He talked to it, quietly, narrating his every move, offering reassurance in a voice that had forgotten how to comfort anyone. Somewhere between replacing damp towels and preparing another tiny dose of sugar water, he looked down and said, almost without thinking, "Hang in there, Baxter." The name just came. A soft name. Not grand, not wild. Just something human. Something close. He didn't let himself smile, not fully. Not yet. But something had cracked inside him. Something sealed off for too long. He sat by the table long into the night, watching the cub's chest rise and fall, his eyes flicking off into the window where the mother bear still stood, unmoving. He should have known better. About naming him, about caring as much, but his heart didn't listen. Not anymore. Just past dawn, the soft crunch of tires on snow broke the long silence outside. Aiden stepped onto the porch, sleep-deprived and stiff, as a battered Forest Service truck rolled into view. Rachel climbed out first, pulling on gloves before her boots hit the ground. A second door opened and out stepped Ginny, a seasoned wildlife vet with silver-streaked hair and a face carved by wind and worry. They didn't waste time on greetings. Aiden led them inside with a quiet urgency, and the two women moved swiftly, professionally, their hands sure and practiced whereas it fumbled. Rachel knelt beside the table, already lifting the cub's paw, checking reflexes. Ginny pulled a small case from her bag and began taking vitals, examining the eyes, the ribs, the leg Aiden had splinted. "You did better than most would," Ginny said without looking up, "but this little guy's been through hell." She glanced at the window, where the mother bear still stood like a statue. "She hasn't moved?" Aiden shook his head. "Not an inch." Rachel looked at the wounds more closely now, her brows furrowing. "These weren't from a fall," she murmured. "Claw marks, deep, space wide." Ginny nodded. "Big male. She must have fought him off." The thought chilled Aiden. How close death had come to the cub, how far the mother had gone to shield him. Then Ginny said something that froze him entirely. "And she must have watched you. For a while, maybe. Knew you'd help." Rachel glanced up. "Bears don't do this. Not without reason." Aiden said nothing, but a strange weight settled over the room. Not fear, not awe, something else, like being seen through and accepted by something older and more instinctual than logic. The mother bear's eyes through the glass weren't pleading. They were knowing. Maybe she had been watching, long before she stepped out of the trees. Maybe she had seen something in him even he had forgotten. 2 weeks passed in a rhythm that blurred the line between man and beast, wilderness and warmth. The cub, now affectionately named Baxter by Rachel during a check-in call, had not only survived, he had started to thrive. Though still limping, He moved with growing curiosity, sniffing boots, pawing at old books, dozing near the fireplace like he'd always belonged there. Aiden, once a man haunted by silence, now found comfort in the rustle of fur, the soft huffs and gentle grumbles of his unlikely companion. Morning coffee became a shared ritual. Aiden at the table, Baxter sprawled nearby, eyes following every motion. Outside the cabin, the mother bear no longer lingered. She had vanished into the trees after one last long stare through the glass, as if to say her part was done. But peace never stays long in borrowed time. One morning, the low hum of a government SUV echoed up the frozen path. Aiden stepped outside to meet it, tension already coiling in his chest. A uniformed deputy from Wildlife Services emerged, clipboard in hand, expression firm but not unkind. He didn't waste time. "We've had reports." Rachel flagged the situation for review. "You got a week," he said. "This cub needs to be transferred to a rehabilitation center. He's still wild. And this." He gestured toward the cabin. "This isn't protocol." Aiden's jaw clenched. He wanted to argue, but the man wasn't wrong. Baxter was still a bear, no matter how safe he felt curled beside the hearth. Yet how could he explain the bond, the silence that had been filled, the invisible threads that had stitched two broken creatures into a single fragile piece? Back inside, Baxter looked up from a scatter of pine cones he'd been batting around. Aiden stared at him, a weight pressing against his chest. Home wasn't always about walls or species. Sometimes it was about understanding, unspoken, undeserved, but deeply felt. And now, time was running out. The sky was overcast the morning Aiden loaded the crate into the back of his truck. The mountains cloaked in fog that clung to the trees like breath held too long. Baxter didn't resist. He'd grown stronger, heavier, eyes sharper now, less cub and more bear. Still, as Aiden paused to tighten the straps, a small paw pressed against the wooden slats, and a soft chuff escaped, familiar, uncertain. It nearly broke him. He drove in silence, miles rolling under his tires like chapters he wasn't ready to end. The drop-off point was deep within the protected stretch of forest, where no tracks but paws and hooves had any right to linger. Aiden lifted the crate door and stepped back. Baxter didn't rush. He sniffed the air, then turned to look at Aiden one last time. Not with fear, not confusion, but something in between memory and instinct. For a moment, Aiden thought he might come back. But then there was a rustle from the tree lean, massive, deliberate. The mother bear emerged like a shadow turned solid, her gaze locked not on her son, but on the man who had kept him alive. She didn't growl, didn't charge. She simply waited. Baxter looked between them, torn by threads older than words. And then he chose. Not suddenly, not with a leap, but with quiet steps that felt like a slow goodbye. He walked to her. She sniffed him, nudged him, then turned. Together they faded into the trees, the undergrowth swallowing their forms until only silence remained. Aiden stood there a long time. Then, just before she vanished entirely, the mother bear stopped. She turned her head. Their eyes met. Aiden's tired and full, hers ancient and calm. In that glance was gratitude, warning, respect, a connection that had no name, no need for words. Then she was gone. He didn't cry. He didn't speak. He just stood in the clearing with the cold air pressing into his lungs. And for the first time in years, he felt something close to whole. Winter passed slowly after the bears disappeared into the forest, but something in Aiden Brody shifted with the seasons. The silence of the cabin, once awake, now felt like breath between heartbeats, alive, meaningful. He wrote again, not for headlines or bylines, but to remember. The story poured out of him in the glow of firelight, page after page of everything he couldn't explain. It wasn't just about the cub or the mother or even the long nights of doubt. It was about being seen, chosen, changed. The forest had offered him a mirror, and for the first time in years, he didn't look away. By spring, the snow had receded, and with it came signs, soft impressions in the mud near the cabin's edge, too large to be a deer, too careful to be a man. He found broken branches where none should have fallen, pine cones disturbed in familiar patterns. And once, just once, a low sound in the distance that made him pause mid-sentence, pen hovering above the paper. He didn't investigate. He didn't call out. Some things are better left unnamed, respected like a secret between old friends. Aiden still lives alone, but the word alone no longer stings. There's a presence in the trees now, in the hush of the wind through the pines, in the warmth he feels when he writes late into the night. He doesn't need to see them to know they're there. If this story touched something in you, if you believe that wildness can hold love, that silence can be healing, and that even a wounded soul can be brought back to life, then don't let this be the end. Like, subscribe, and share this story with someone who needs to believe in quiet miracles. The forest is still listening. Are you?